Thank you, Kalyani. Well, good morning, everyone. Isn't that a beautiful day today? So here we are on week 7 of our study of the book by Richard Rohr, The Universal Christ. And this week we're discussing chapters 13 and 14 in the book. One of the things that we talk about in unity is the concept that we are all one. But do we really understand at a deeper level what that really means to us? In chapter 13 of the book, Richard Rohr discusses the concept of using the example of going through times of pain and sorrow. How many times do we go through things where it really pulls us at our depth? And that sometimes we feel we are so alone at those times. I think each and every one of us has had a time in our lives where we have experienced deep pain and deep sorrow over someone who's passed, the ending of a relationship, unexpected changes in our lives. And I think for most of us here, we have had a time or two where we have felt deep, gut-wrenching pain and sorrow. I think one of the most challenging aspects of the New Age culture, if you want to call it that, is that we have a tendency to shy away from discussing pain, sorrow, sadness, hurt, and even more so in giving ourselves permission to really feel what we are feeling at that time. You know, being able to have the feelings of pain and sorrow come up and hold them, to give ourselves permission to feel them, I think is a quality of a more high spiritual being. And the reason I say that is because none of us like feeling what we call negative feelings. Being really honest with how we are feeling at any given moment in time. When we feel pain and sorrow, sadness, we want to shy away from it. But there's a part of us that needs to feel those feelings and not push them away. That being willing to say, this is how I feel, takes a person committed to their spiritual growth, their spiritual connection, and to be able to honor all facets of who and what they are and feeling every feeling. We're down here as spiritual beings in these human bodies, and we came to feel the feelings. So pain, sorrow, sadness are aspects that he calls tension within the body. And I feel like this has a spiritual quality if we're able to hold the tension that we're feeling, whatever it is, and not, as he says, collapse it. Because it's easier for us to collapse the tension, to push it aside, to hide from those feelings, and to not want to look at them. It's easier to move to one side or the other of anything that we're feeling that we would call negative. When in actuality, if we can bring them up, look them square in the eye, and go into them, and honor them as a feeling that we just have as a human being, we can move through them faster. In my experience in life, and as with most all of you, we all know people who don't want to look at their feelings. And they resort to shoving them down so much. And they take on this aspect of, no, it's not bothering me. Everything's beautiful, life's beautiful. Everything's fine. And that's what Richard Rohr calls the superficial New Age thinking. When we can get to the point where we can look at life and what it's handing us in the very moment and be truly honest with our feelings And that right at that moment, we don't see things as being beautiful. That we are feeling sad. That we are feeling a sense of pain and sorrow. That's when we can really, truly start the healing process, and to be able to move through to where we can look back on it and then see it as beautiful. Because we've learned something from it. We've grown from it. And one of the things that in that growth we learn, we can handle more than what we thought we could. We've all suffered loss. We've all suffered pain. And some of us have even gone through times of betrayal, abuse, rejection, and even more. In the book, Richard Rohr talks about the loss of his dog Violet and the pain that it caused him. He said he suffered intensely because of that pain. He shared that it's not the exact object of your love, it's the character of the relationship with that object that makes love love. Even though Venus was just a dog, having had her for almost 15 years, she was with him every day. She would jump for joy when he would come back into the room. He said there was complete, absolute, and utter connection and unqualified love that was given to him from Violet. Absolute, unconditional love. So anyone who's had a dog, or any type of pet actually, knows that anything can elicit love from us. And that it's the flow of love, no matter where that gets triggered. That's the important thing for us in this life. So whether it be an animal, whether it be a human, whether it be walking in nature, whatever it is that elicits love for you, that's what we connect with. This is what Venus was for him. Her joy got him into the flow of spirit. He even made the statement in one of his podcasts that Venus, for that certain period of time, the 15 years that she was with him, acted as the Christ for him. One who mirrored unconditional acceptance. One who mirrored the light that was in him and made him delighted in her. So her death was very hard on him. He experienced deep, deep sadness and sorrow with her passing. He said he walked around for weeks feeling empty, to not have that mirror right in front of him. He said that there was something about this type of love that made him realize how infinite love really is. Rohr says that great love and great suffering are the paths of transformation. He said if you've never been in that flow of, I would die for her, or I would give my life for him, then there's no understanding the depths of which that sorrow can be felt. Anything that is love to that degree and is eternal, and to deny that is to absolutely deny the nature of love. Rohr said that what helped him move out of this deep pain and sorrow that he was feeling was his attention being called to the events that were going on around him in the world. He said he saw a picture of a woman from Syria running, holding her child. And he realized that as much as he was in pain and sorrow over the loss of Venus, he said that he knew his sorrow could never reach the degree of sadness that this woman had at that moment. He said he felt that at that moment that his sorrow and her sorrow was a sorrow that was shared within the context of humanity. That there was a solidarity between him and her, and him and all others who were going through some kind of personal pain and sorrow. He writes that this is something that melds us together. When you think that you are the only one that is experiencing sorrow or sadness, hurt or pain of some sort, it can actually send you into a state of self-pity. And you can stay there as a victim. You can keep running through your mind how unfair it all is. This is happening to me. But when you begin to understand that people all over the world are having maybe not identical but similar experiences, and maybe even deeper experiences of pain and sorrow, you realize that you are connected to all of these people, the whole world, in fact, through this aspect of suffering. So as much as love can connect us with all things, suffering can also have the power to connect you with others. It can move you if you so choose, because of your own personal experience, to understand what other people are going through. We have the chance, if we allow ourselves, to have a heart softening and a heart opening with compassion for what others are going through. And with that, we can feel connected with others. If we choose to take that step, it can actually have the ability to open our hearts to such a deep level of empathy and compassion. And although we're experiencing pain and sorrow ourselves, when we can understand that others are also experiencing this, we find that we can look outside of ourselves and have the understanding and compassion for another person that they are going through their own pain and sorrow. And maybe they also need that hug, that touch, as much as you do. It can actually connect you with others at a deeper level than you've ever connected with anybody before. Rohr says that grief is the greatest, if not the most necessary teacher of the soul, and that we have to go through it at some point in our lives, or there's a whole bunch of things that you won't know and won't experience because you haven't reached into the depths of your being in feeling this emotion. This is one of the things that a lot of metaphysical teachers shy away from. It's about talking about pain and sorrow. Grieving is a part of our lives. As much as we wish that all could be sunshine and roses, we all come down here to earth to experience all emotions. And emotional pain and sorrow, grieving, is one of those. It's at that moment that it can either universalize you, where you feel a part of all others that are going through something similar, or it can fill you with self-pity that can really trap you. It isn't until you realize that everyone else in the world has felt the same thing or will feel that you can get out of your own inner self and start the healing process. The feeling, I'm not alone in this. Others have gone through it also, and others have reached the other side in spite of what's going on. If we allow it, it can give us a more sympathetic and empathic viewpoint toward life. In the weeks before she died, Rohr writes that Venus somehow communicated to him that all sadness, whether cosmic, human, or canine, is one and the same. Somehow her eyes were all eyes, even God's eyes. And the sadness she expressed was a divine and universal sadness. he realized that all the suffering and sadness that was going on in the world what he calls the one sadness of God, and that he didn't have to hold this sadness alone. For Richard Rohr, he began to realize that God was right there with him, holding him, being with him, that he wasn't abandoned by God during those days where he was experiencing this deep loss, but that God was right there in the midst of his suffering. When we're talking about this aspect of pain and suffering, and this being a universal way of life, and this is also where we can find change and growth. Life is continuously about change. Within that change, many times there is pain and sorrow, and there is sadness. We don't have to lose a person through death to experience pain and sorrow. But until we recognize that pain, sorrow, sadness is a way of life, we stuff it down and we refuse to look at it. What Richard Rohr is trying to come across to us is that pain, sorrow, grieving are a part of life, and for us to not be in resistance to those feelings. When we stop being in resistance to feeling this, and we just allow ourselves to feel these emotions, then we can actually move through them. When we stop being in resistance to them, we actually open ourselves to learning from them. This is where community comes in. When we reach out to others who have already traveled this path and learn from them how they did it, our journey becomes so much easier. And with the help of others, we can overcome that resistance to changing. This is what we call our own personal resurrection. Jesus wasn't the only one that was resurrected after he was on the cross. Each and every one of us goes through a time, those times of sorrow, being judged, feeling condemned, that sometimes we feel like we're the ones being crucified, that we're on our own personal cross. But when we move through them, knowing that others have, knowing that God is inside of us, as us, we can have our own personal resurrection out of this pain and sorrow. Rohr writes that resurrection is another word for change, but particularly positive change. You know, we in the West have a picture in our minds of what Jesus looked like coming out of the tomb on Easter Sunday. There we are. This is generally the picture that we have of Jesus for Easter Sunday morning. However, in the Eastern Orthodox churches, they have a different picture. Notice in this picture that it's showing Jesus rising the dead out of their tombs. And here you can't really see it unless you look really closely, but there are actually chains around the people that are binding them to those tombs. And if you look closely, the chains are actually being broken. Thank you, Crystal. In the West, we teach that Jesus overcame death and all that it represents. The Eastern philosophy teaches that through the resurrection, all overcame death and all that it represents. That Jesus is actually breaking all the internal chains that bind us and keeps us locked into our own pain, sorrow, and suffering. When you have come through something and you have grown and you have been able, through whatever it is you've come through, to have more gratitude for life, to have more empathy toward others, to have more compassion for those in the world around you, to be able to allow God's love to flow through you more completely toward all the events going on in this world, then you have had a personal resurrection out of an old way of being. Every time you choose love or to positively connect with someone else or something else, you have resurrected out of your old self, and you have been raised up into being in touch with the highest aspect of the divine. When Jesus was resurrected, it was said that he raised his body into a body of light. Jesus was already performing what we call miracles, changing water into wine, raising the dead, healing the sick. He already had a consciousness so high that he knew that what went on this earth, he could overcome. So we may not as yet be able to raise our bodies into pure light, but what about our state of consciousness? It is possible in this lifetime to raise our personal state of consciousness. It is possible to raise our state of consciousness into the resurrected state of thinking, being, and expressing only the light of God in our lives and to everyone we come into contact with. So where is our consciousness right now? Are we ready to look at everything, including pain, sorrow, suffering, face it head on, feel the feelings we need to feel, and then allow the grace of God to come into us and move through it all, helping us to learn and grow from it, and creating a greater and more expanded us? Are we ready, truly ready, to be resurrected out of all judgment, condemnation, anger, and fear of any sort, and become the full expression of the light in our own personal lives? I think we are. As a matter of fact, I know we are. I look around this congregation this morning, and I know almost every one of you. I know, absolutely know, that we are all ready to be the highest possible expression of the light that we came here to be. And I personally thank God for that. And I thank God for each and every one of you who has made the decision to be a greater expression of light on this earth. And I thank you for that.